$22 billion vanished before dawn. And it did not vanish through inflation, sanctions, or the slow violence of economic pressure. It vanished in fire, not through market volatility, not through sanctions, not through ordinary economic warfare. In a single night, 1,050 Iranian precision missiles slammed into 10 of Israel's most highly classified underground gold bullion war reserves. The strategic wealth stockpiles designed to finance military operations, stabilize the currency, and keep the Israeli economy alive through the darkest scenarios defense planners had modeled for decades. In 28 minutes, those reserves were reduced to melted metal, burned currency, collapsed vault systems, and shattered bedrock. As Netanyahu convened an emergency crisis meeting, the IDF Economic Warfare Directorate uncovered the number that defined the scale of the strike. Only 8% of the buried vaults were still intact. 8%. And with that number, the meaning of the entire operation became impossible to ignore. I have spent 32 years inside the classified system reviewing material the public never sees. I have briefed the exact vulnerabilities exploited in this overnight operation to senior officers whose names I will take to my grave. And I am telling you with the full weight of that experience. The after-action material that crossed my desk before dawn that April morning did not document a failure of intelligence. It is documented worse. A failure of institutional will to act on intelligence that was accurate, specific, and transmitted through the proper channels to decision-makers who had authority to address it. The assessment I am describing was written before this happened. That is not dramatic framing. That is the operational fact. The scenario that unfolded over central and northern Israel had already been modeled. The vulnerability of underground economic reserve infrastructure to precision saturation strikes had been identified, quantified, and documented in classified assessments that reached the relevant principles. The warnings were not missed. They were received. They were acknowledged. Then they were filed away, while other priorities dominated procurement decisions that left 10 gold bullion war reserves protected against the wrong threat profile. Iran absorbed the lesson. The institutions that produced the warning moved on. That began the disaster now. Now let me take you inside what happened, because the operational details are the argument, and that argument is more consequential than any official framing. At 4:31 local time, mobile transporter erector launchers, dispersed across 5 western and central Iranian provinces, received the synchronized launch order. The Salman missile family carries a 2,000-kilometer range and a 1,000-kilogram warhead, optimized for terminal maneuver and precision penetration against hardened underground targets. Solid fuel motors ignited in a staggered ripple, timed against satellite coverage gaps that Iranian planners had spent months mapping. The first wave, 260 missiles, rose on extended range trajectories designed to exploit those gaps. Within 28 minutes, 10 secret gold bullion war reserves across central and northern Israel registered direct precision-guided impacts. These were not soft targets. They were facilities carved into mountain bedrock, reinforced with concrete vaults, layered blast doors, EMP shielding, redundant power systems, and climate control networks built to preserve bullion, currency reserves, and strategic financial continuity during war. Their architecture rested on one assumption. The locations were protected by hardening and by the difficulty of targeting classified underground economic infrastructure without classified collection capability. That assumption was wrong. Iran had been proving it wrong for years through commercial satellite imagery and open-source geospatial analysis before the first Salman missile left its launcher. That is why the destruction of those 10 vaults is not primarily a story about Iranian long-range strike capability. It is a story about the gap between institutional warning and institutional action. It is a story about what happens when an accurate warning is archived instead of funded. And it is a story about the cost of that failure when the bill arrives not as a budget memo, but as $22 billion of strategic wealth reduced to slag and smoke. Now look at the exchange ratio. Each Salman missile represented an Iranian outlay of roughly $650,000 on average. The Israeli interceptors committed in response, including Arrow, 3 systems, David's Sling, and Iron Dome components, pulled into roles they were never designed to fill. cost between $40,000 and $60,000 per round. On paper, that appears favorable to the defender. But paper collapses when salvo density exceeds reload capacity. The first wave forced immediate commitment of every available interceptor magazine. By the time the second wave of 300 missiles crossed the border, Israeli fire control teams were already executing emergency reload protocols. Under combat conditions, those protocols require 28 to 38 minutes per cycle. The third and fourth waves arrived before those cycles could complete. The result was brutal. Iran spent approximately $680 million in missiles and launch operations. Israel lost the functional equivalent of $22 billion in destroyed bullion, irreplaceable wartime currency, and compromised strategic wealth reserves. $680 million against $22 billion. That is not a tactical imbalance. It is a structural indictment of a certification framework that protected classified underground economic reserves against a threat model its own warning reports had already identified as inadequate. But the exchange ratio is only the visible part. The targeting methodology is the deeper revelation. That is the part the official language is trying to manage, soften, and obscure. Because if the methodology is understood clearly, this event stops being an Israeli catastrophe and becomes a global precedent. The targeting package that achieved sub-7-meter accuracy did not require human penetration of Israeli security networks, classified signals collection, or any method sophisticated enough for counterintelligence to detect before a usable package could be assembled. It required commercial satellite imagery, open-source geospatial algorithms, and cross-referencing against thermal signatures from routine overflights. Those overflights recorded the heat patterns of climate control, exhaust vents, power substation footprints, and ventilation shaft configurations. Underground economic reserve infrastructure produces distinctive signatures in commercial infrared imagery. Temperature control, humidity control, and atmospheric stability all generate measurable heat exhaust. The facilities were classified. Their climate control exhaust profiles were not. That is the key. The warning reports said this would happen. They warned that the systems designed to preserve bullion and currency would reveal the vaults to any adversary patient enough to collect commercial satellite imagery over time. This was not exotic intelligence. It was engineering logic. Iran derived it. Israel filed it. And for years the vaults kept broadcasting until 1,050 Salman missiles had been programmed against them. One sentence from the internal IDF Economic Warfare After Action Memorandum captures the whole failure. We hardened air bases, command centers, and underground missile silos with billions of dollars, but left our national gold war reserves sitting in facilities protected by little more than concrete walls and hope. That sentence needs no embellishment. It was written by professionals who had spent their careers building the economic warfighting architecture, whose destruction they were now forced to count in damage columns. And it contains the honest conclusion public briefings will not produce. Because the official narrative cannot afford to dwell on the targeting methodology, the methodology is the dangerous part. It means every underground economic reserve, every classified strategic wealth storage facility, every buried currency stockpile or precious metal reserve certified under the assumption that adversary targeting requires classified collection capability may now be exposed to the same vulnerability. If it has climate control systems, it has thermal signatures. If it has thermal signatures, those signatures can be collected. If those signatures can be collected over time, they can be cross-referenced. And if they can be cross-referenced with patience and technical competence, they can become targeting solutions. The threat is not abstract. It requires commercial satellite subscriptions, open-source geospatial algorithms, and time. That is why this operation matters beyond Israel. Now consider the human dimension, because strategic analysis alone cannot carry what happened inside those vaults. Colonel Leah Goldman, a senior Strategic Reserves logistics officer, was conducting a routine overnight inventory shift inside one affected vault when the first wave arrived. Her final logged transmission described technicians verifying gold bar serial numbers. They were confident in the mountain overhead, confident in the layered defenses outside. Then the roof shifted, and the lights went out. She survived with injuries that will require months of rehabilitation. Others did not. Their families are still waiting for full confirmation. Those families did not participate in the procurement decisions that certified these vaults against an inadequate threat model. They did not file the warnings. They did not decide that other priorities mattered more than a documented vulnerability. But they will carry the cost in the most direct way possible. That is what balance sheets do not capture. The people performing routine inventory duties at 431 were there because a certification process told their chain of command the facilities were adequately protected. The certification was wrong. The warning said it was wrong. And the families waiting for answers are the human consequence of the distance between archived warning and procurement action. Now the consequences move outward. Russia and China are already extracting lessons. Russia is processing the operation through the lens of high-intensity conflict against NATO. For years, its doctrine studied how economic reserve infrastructure could be destroyed in the opening hours of war. What it lacked was live-fire validation against Western-certified hardened economic infrastructure. Now it has it. The strike validated precision mass-fire doctrine for fixed strategic reserve suppression. Russian planning for Baltic and Eastern European scenarios is now being recalibrated around road-mobile solid-fuel systems, reduced launch-to-impact windows, and guidance packages refined by the penetration data from this operation. The key parameter confirmed was simple. Strategic economic reserves can be neutralized before relocation protocols can be executed. China's extraction is geographically different, but structurally identical. The PLA rocket force is applying the lesson to Taiwan Strait and South China Sea contingency planning. DF-16 and DF-17 brigades are reportedly simulating salvo sizes scaled to the Israeli event, emphasizing volume and commercial thermal signature targeting over classified collection. The concept being refined is the opening hours destruction of Taiwan's strategic economic reserves, gold stockpiles, foreign currency reserves, precious metals, and the assets that determine how long an economy can sustain war without external resupply. Survivability assumptions for Allied economic reserve infrastructure have been adjusted downward. This is why economic reserve targeting is different from military infrastructure targeting. Destroying military infrastructure damages a country's ability to fight. Destroying economic war reserves damages its ability to sustain the fight. Military equipment can sometimes be replaced through Allied resupply. Strategic wealth cannot. $22 billion in bullion and wartime currency does not have a procurement replacement pathway. It has an accumulation pathway, years of savings, market operations, reserve management, and national discipline. The overnight operation did not merely destroy vaults. It destroyed accumulated time. That is why finance ministries, central banks, and defense establishments around the world are reassessing their own underground reserve infrastructure. The vulnerability is not Israeli-specific. It is infrastructure-specific. Any buried strategic wealth facility that depends on environmental control produces the very thermal exhaust signatures that commercial geospatial collection can exploit. 3 nations have already begun recalibrating. Saudi Arabia has fast-tracked procurement of advanced precision strike systems from Chinese partners. Turkey has commissioned new vulnerability studies for forward economic storage facilities. India has expanded technical consultations on hardening northern mountain vaults while accelerating domestic solid fuel production timelines. The lesson is clear. Thermal signature control is not a secondary vault security issue. It is the primary vulnerability. No amount of reinforced concrete, blast doors, or EMP shielding solves the problem if the facility continues broadcasting its location through heat. The active systems meant to protect the facility, access control, electronic monitoring, perimeter detection, environmental management may compound the very signature that makes the facility targetable. That is the circular failure. The systems built to protect the vault help reveal the vault. The global monetary consequences are already moving. The signal sent to the gold market was doctrinal, not physical. It proved that strategic reserves believed to be protected by secrecy and hardening can be reached by an adversary using patient, commercial collection, and competent engineering. That signal is now propagating through central banks, finance ministries, military planning staffs, and every government whose wartime resilience depends on the assumption that its strategic reserves are difficult to find and harder to hit. The next 90 days will carry 3 observable development paths. First, Israel will attempt emergency relocation of remaining reserves to secondary and tertiary sites. Physical reconstruction may begin quickly, but thermal signature control cannot be solved by pouring new concrete. It requires new doctrine, discipline, and certification standards. Second, Iran will likely release carefully selected imagery, not for celebration, but for signaling. The message will be that follow-on targeting packages for secondary sites have already been assembled using the same commercial methodology. Third, Washington will convene urgent interagency reviews. Those reviews will generate vulnerability assessments, thermal signature guidance, and supplemental funding requests. But new hardware and procedures will not arrive as quickly as the threat has already adapted. The unresolved question is whether Iran maintains a reserve of approximately 1,400 Salman-class missiles ready for immediate use against secondary storage infrastructure. We do not know the precise inventory. We only know Iran was willing to expend 1,050 missiles in one coordinated strike. Given the sophistication of the planning, the absence of follow-on provisioning would be difficult to believe. That number, 1,050, now carries strategic weight. It represents not merely a quantity of missiles, but a quantity of validated targeting solutions against a category once treated as secondary because it was assumed to be difficult to find and reach. The operation proved it wrong. The machine we trusted is no longer the machine we have. Commercial satellite collection is ongoing right now. Thermal exhaust profiles from underground economic reserve facilities around the world are being recorded in routine infrared overflights. Geospatial teams capable of converting those profiles into targeting accuracy operate below the threshold that would trigger traditional counterintelligence alarms. The accumulation is already happening. This is the threat official communications try to manage with language rather than confront honestly. Not because the threat is classified, but because acknowledging it requires admitting that warning reports existed, were received, and were not acted upon. That is the accountability problem. The gap between the honest sentence in the IDF Economic Warfare After Action Memorandum and the official public characterization of the event is not an accident of timing. It is the deliberate management of a strategic failure, a failure that cost $22 billion. A failure that left only 8% vault survival, a failure that left families waiting for confirmation of what happened to people performing routine inventory duties when the inbound tracks filled the sky. Subscribe right now. Turn on notifications. Share this with anyone whose understanding of economic warfare and reserve survivability needs operational reality rather than official language. Because the thermal exhaust profiles are broadcasting right now. The collection is ongoing. The follow-on targeting packages are being refined. Archived warnings are still sitting inside classified document systems, waiting for the next review cycle to rediscover what they already said before the missiles launched. We answered that question once. The answer cost $22 billion, 8% vault survival, and families waiting for the truth. The next answer is being prepared now in the data accumulating against infrastructure whose thermal signatures have never stopped broadcasting.